Let's talk racism, specifically anti-Asian stereotyping. Clearly, it's not as blatant in the pop culture as it was decades ago when, say, Detective Charlie Tchen was solving crimes in the movies.
May I ask your continued assistance? Sometimes very difficult to pick up pumpkin with one finger.
Had you been driving long?
No. At first, I'm a pretty bad driver. But now, me and road turn corner same time.
Charlie Tchen, 1931. Embarrassing. But to what extent is anti-Asian feeling still with us? Let's fast forward about 80 years and watch a 2010 political advertisement produced by the conservative nonprofit think tank Citizens Against Government Waste.
为什么强大的国家都会走向灭亡呢？古希腊、罗马帝国、不列颠帝国、美国，因为他们都犯同样的错误，与原来使得他们成功的原则背道而驰。美国政府企图以庞大的开支和税收来摆脱严重的经济衰退，巨额的所谓刺激开支。 庞大的医疗改革，政府接管私有企业，债务累累。当然，我们是他们的大债主。现在他们都得给我们干活。
You can change the future. You have to. Join Citizens Against Government Waste to stop the spending that is bankrupting America.
Well, if the long arc of history bends toward justice, where are Asian Americans on that arc? Our guests have brought with them many visual examples of anti-Asian stereotyping. We'll see many. Joining us, John Kue Tchen, co-founder of the Museum of Chinese in America. He's a professor at NYU. And with us as well, Dylan Yeats, a doctoral fellow there who teaches Asian American history. And together they've edited The Yellow Peril, an archive of Asian fear. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
What'd you make of that political ad? I thought it was fascinating to see this fictitious communist China scolding America for becoming too socialist.
Right. There's so many elements that don't make sense really when you pull it apart, but in some ways it appeals to this underlying attitude that many Americans have about difference in Asia and the Asian male in some ways as a substitute Fu Manchu in this case, somebody who really is all-knowing and really quite much in control of really how they see the world.
So that's the subtext that you take from the ad, regardless of the political content, right? It could have been about Too much free market, too little free market. It was the image of the Chinese sort of lead character.
The Chinese lead character who is very high-tech and is way ahead of Americans. I mean, of course, this is supposed to take place in 2030, but it's appealing to the anxieties that Americans have. And you just had the person talk about the difficulty of jobs and job training and tech. So this is something that's omnipresent on our mind.
All right, we're going to put up the first of our many images from the book. And Dylan, tell us, as we look at this image, what you mean by Yellow Peril, the title of the book. Where does the term come from, and why do you use it to organize the book, and how does this image relate?
Well, the term Yellow Peril comes directly, it was actually coined by Kaiser Wilhelm II. He claimed to have had a prophetic dream after the Japanese invaded China in 1894. But he used it to try to organize the Europeans together, where he wanted Europeans not to fight each other in Asia, but to work together and fight the Japanese. So it's, from its very beginning, has been a way to kind of organize the West against the East. And this is actually a drawing of a painting that he commissioned, which he sent to all the heads of state of Europe, as well as President McKinley in the United States, to try to convince them to come together as the United West.
I want to point out in the distance, Archangel Gabriel is pointing out a dragon that's riding a storm, and on top of the dragon is a seated Buddha, right, as the symbol of yellow peril. So in this day and age, it's rather kind of ludicrous, but at that time it was really quite potent.
Ludicrous. Let's go to the next slide. This is 10 years later, 1905.
Yeah, this is a postcard, French postcard that was sold after the Japanese beat the Russians in the Russo-Japanese War, which was a moment when the Japanese army, which was considered to be very well trained, very organized, very mechanically savvy with new equipment, beat the Russians, who were seen as not as technologically advanced, and it created an enormous amount of anxiety among Europeans and Americans that they were falling behind, just like the ad. And so this concept of yellow peril, which really dates from the early 20th century and is in some ways rooted in a fear of Japan, is still with us, that has taken many forms since then.
Let's go on to the next slide, but back in time to the 15th century, this is actually some form of a map that represents a certain mindset, right?
This is called a TO map. The horizontal across is really the Nile River, and Asia, or Sem, is above, and obviously this is referring to the east, but in this case it's really above. So this is before the east-west formation occurs, but Oriens on the very top refers to where the sun rises, and Occident is where the sun sets.
So a basic mindset that the West is one thing and the East or the Orient is other from a Western perspective. How about this map? Well, this is not, well, what is this? Is this a globe encased in something?
Yeah, this is actually a political cartoon from 1907 from Chicago. After Theodore Roosevelt sent what he called the White Fleet, which was the U.S. Pacific Fleet painted white, over to the China Sea in order to intimidate the Japanese and sort of lay claim to American control of the Pacific and the Philippines. And this image suggests that that's a very easy, dignified, kind of dainty process almost.
The ease and promise of imperialism.
Exactly.
So flash forward from 1907 to 1939. Oh, there's another globe.
Well, this is one of the things that we're trying to argue in this book, is that in many ways the sort of yellow peril fear is, what if they do to us what we want to do to them? So in the hands of Roosevelt, this chain of the Great White Fleet taking over the world seems very nice, but in this image, if the tables are turned and it's in fact the, quote, yellow races instead of the white races that control things, things are quite terrifying. And you can even see the Brooklyn Bridge burning below the sort of Asian sinister mastermind who's taking over the world.
Yeah, look at those fingertips. Those evil fingertips. And it looks like the land masses on the globe are yellow. I don't know if that's a coincidence.
Oh yes, the yellow is taking over the whole mass except for east of the Mississippi, right?
Well, another version of that idea is this Rising Tide of Color, which was a popular book from 1921. Actually, the introduction is written by the president of the American Museum of Natural History, and it is predicting that if Europeans continue to colonize the world, as well as be divided between each other, this is written right after World War I, then the people of color of the world are going to rise up and punish Europeans for their mistreatment. And I think that's in some ways one of the many elements that we explore in the book, is how fears of aggression then translate into a sort of fantasy that we deserve and are going to get retribution for it.
Now, I think everything we've seen so far relates to fear of others in other countries. Let's look at some images from the book that relate to domestic populations and fears. And so tell us about this image.
Well, this is Colombia representing kind of American promise and progress, floating westward. And in her wake, the American Indian and the buffalo are receding, stepping back, and progress represented by the telegraph wire, the railroad, and then in the far distance you can see kind of Manhattan Island and the ships that are kind of following. It's really farmers, a part of progress. And here you have, in this next image, in some ways the consequence anxiety. We're really talking about a lot of anxieties about progress as well. And in this case, the octopus is representing the kind of monopoly of the railroad magnates. And the octopus is strangling Liberty, who's holding out the Constitution. And you see, again, the telegraph wires in the back.
And the octopus as an image will recur again and again and again, including on your book cover, and we'll get to that particular image in a little while. But is there a confluence between the corporate titans and the yellow peril, quote unquote, represented by that octopus?
Well, in California, the Working Men's Party had two slogans. One was, let's get rid of the monopolists, and the second one, let's get rid of the Chinese. So the two were kind of brought together. And in fact, it was the Chinese workers who were somehow seen as working too hard and being too efficient and causing the unemployment that is out there. That's actually a note that is quite resonant today.
And this?
Well, this is that Chinese octopus. He's working all these different jobs, from sewing, kind of sewing clothing, to making cigars, making boots, and sending money back to China.
It's a fascinating image, because it's not the abstract octopus that we saw in the first image. It's really a person with so many arms that they can be so productive and therefore threatening. Oh, this looks like a romance novel.
Well, it is in a way, in the sense that we see this as sort of the ultimate result of, if America doesn't defend itself from the octopus, then Colombia is taken over by these hordes. They're immigrants, and they're going to do with her what they will. So that is the ultimate result of not defending against this sort of imagined threat.
This book cover is from 1950. What is it, actually?
Well, it's kind of a noir, book, and if you read the story itself, it's actually not as dramatic in this way, but the covers on these things that are pulps, really, oftentimes were exaggerating and kind of appealing to the prejudices of the time.
And even the title, which I think would be completely unacceptable today, 12 Chinamen and a woman.
Yeah, absolutely.
A woman who has no nationality, apparently.
Right. Chink.
Except by looking at her.
Right, the word chink was used, Chinaman was used. This was really common at the time.
Now this is an image that's actually kind of a pushback, isn't it? Would you call this an anti-racist image? And this dates all the way back to 1912.
Yeah, I mean, this is a more complex image, but it shows this skeleton coming out of the closet scaring Uncle Sam. And it's really a position that Uncle Sam is taking, protesting Russian exclusion of Jewish Americans, and coming back to haunt him is the exclusion of Chinese. So we're talking about a more complex cartoon here that really kind of gets at, I think, a certain kind of desire to forget and repress the history and not be aware of it, and then having it come back and haunting Uncle Sam or Americans in some way or another.
And the issue at the time was the Chinese Exclusion Act, which stopped immigration from China?
Passed in 1882. There was an anti-Chinese movement in the 1870s. It wasn't effectively repealed until the 1960s. So this is a long-standing exclusion of Chinese laborers from this country. Elites, merchants, scholars, students could come over, but that was a very small group of people.
So that was 1912. Now 2005, should we call this Uncle Sam as 97-pound weakling?
Yeah, this was actually the cover of Fortune magazine in August of 2005. And I think it encapsulates quite the sentiment that as we're concerned about the problems facing this country, which we've had a lot of examples of on your show already today, problems of violence, problems of lack of access to health resources and education, that then becomes imagined as, oh, actually, well, China's doing great and we're so weak. And it sort of displaces, I think, a lot of the self-reflective concern for how we're doing things onto a global contest that is a much safer and easier thing to worry about than our own domestic failures.
Similar to that political ad we saw at the beginning. Google octopus versus China octopus. Is that what we're looking at?
Yeah, and the China octopus, of course, has glasses, right, as the Chinese professor does.
Wait, that isn't Google Glass on the other one?
Right. And it's the competition over technology, right? And China is seen as the coming giant competing with Google. So the octopus comes back in various forms. In this case, monopolies, which we saw earlier, but also there have been representations of Jewish people and communists as somehow, synonymous, clutching the word.
We just have 45 seconds left. Thank you for all these images from your book, so many that we didn't get to see. What do you hope comes of this? If people understand these images in historical and contemporary context, what can be better?
We want people to understand that this is still omnipresent. It's visceral. It's not part of the past. It's there, and it could be mobilized at different times depending on different kinds of crises. And we're really concerned about how it can be mobilized for war or for economic war, for example. And it's something that oftentimes exists and pops up again.
10 seconds. How did a guy named Dylan Yeats get so interested in this?
Well, I think it's actually an issue that affects us all. It really structures policy at the highest levels, and it distracts us, I think, from all the issues that we face.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you.